one of those days that I'm like full made up false eyelashes on top, and definitely still wearing my pajama shirt, pajama pants, and Uggs. Alright, so today it is Foundation Friday, and this is actually the last Foundation Friday before 15 Days of Foundation starts next week on Thursday, 6 p.m. Pacific time. There's going to be a new video every single day for 15 days. I still have my normal videos going up Monday and Wednesday of next week, so starting next week, you guys are going to have a shit ton of videos for a few weeks. Since I've been filming foundation first impressions out the wazoo right now, I wanted to do a different video for today's Foundation Friday. We're going to be talking all about my favorite powders, setting powders, things that I set my foundation with. So some of these products I've used for literally years. Actually, most of them I've used for a long time. There are a couple newer ones. You guys will see a ton of them that you've already heard about 50,000 times, but I just wanted to make one video talking all about what I like in each powder, how I would wear it, what kind of foundations I would wear it with, the finish of them, how the lightest shades compare, and also which ones I liked more for my oily skin, and then which ones work now well for me with dry skin. I'm in a rare position right now where I've actually had all skin types, so I have a good idea of how these powders perform on different skin types, which hopefully is helpful for you guys. So if you're excited for this video and you enjoy while you're watching, don't forget to give it a thumbs up. If you're new here, you can join the Bayrito family and subscribe. Since this is the only video right now that I'm filming like in real time, I'm filming this on Thursday and it's going up Friday when you guys are seeing this. I just want to say a huge thank you for all of your support so far. We've raised over $5,500 I think right now. I checked this morning. We're shooting for $20,000. Actually added 2 mugs and 2 black shirts down below that were the 15 Days of Foundation limited edition designs from past series. So if you missed those designs, check the link down below. Project Beauty Share and I have been just overwhelmed by all of your guys' support. You guys are incredible. So that's linked down below and the announcement video if you have no idea what I'm talking about right now. All right, here we go. Favorite powders. All right, so powders for me are something that my skin has had always a really tricky time with. I don't know if it's because I have a lot of texture, but whether it's under eye setting powder, face powder, it is difficult for me to find a powder that sits on top of my skin really beautifully, that doesn't take away the coverage of the foundation underneath. You guys won't see any actually there's one translucent powder in here, but for the most part I go for pressed powders that have some kind of pigment in it. So usually I actually go for a powder foundation because that's something that I don't find takes away coverage. It actually adds a little bit of coverage on, and if you have acne or if you have a lot of things to cover up, which I had for years, using a powder foundation to set your foundation can be something that works amazing. Even now that I don't have nearly as much to cover up on my skin, I still like using these powders because any kind of loose translucent powder, or most loose powders, even if they do have pigment to them, take away the coverage of my foundation, make it look splotchy, just don't sit well on my skin at all. I've tried different ways to apply them with sponges, different brushes. I've tried everything, and these are like my holy grail powders that make my skin look beautiful. A lot of people, translucent powders look beautiful on top of their foundation. That's not the case for me. So just keep that in mind with the powders I'm recommending. A lot of these are powder foundations, which doesn't really mean shit. You can use makeup however you want to. If a powder foundation works best to set your makeup, then use it. Just because it has the word foundation attached to it doesn't mean you can't use it as a setting powder. It just depends on how products sit on top of your skin. So with that in mind, this first powder is one that I've used for years. This is the Laura Geller Balance and Brighten Foundation SPF 15 in the shade Porcelain, the lightest shade. They changed the packaging of this. I actually just ordered a new one. It was on Hotlook the other day for half price. I think it was around like 15 bucks on there. Hotlook is a flash sale site. I'll leave a link down below, but it can be awesome for finding makeup on there. And they changed the packaging, so this is the older packaging. I've gone through so many of these because this worked when I had oily skin, and also this works now that I have dry skin. This is a powder that gives you a beautiful satin finish. It's not the most glowy out of the powders I'm going to talk about, but does have more of a radiant satin finish, not to the point where it's going to make your skin look too dewy. It just gives a really nice skin-like satin finish to it. Should we say satin finish again? The shade of this is beautiful if you have fair skin. This is actually a tiny bit light for my skin, so I love that for lightening foundations that might be a little bit too dark. That's also something that I use these powders for, is depending on how the shade of my foundation is that day, if I need to lighten it, if I need to darken it, I can always adjust it with a powder. When I had oily skin, I don't feel like this is a powder that particularly controlled my oil or anything. It mostly just helped set my foundation. If I ever have a foundation that just turns out too cakey, looks like too much, this is one of the powders I'll use to kind of just smooth everything, blend everything together. Over the years, I've also found that the brush I use to apply my powder with makes a huge difference. If you have never really found a powder that you feel like is making your skin look good, the brush might be the issue. I would say the majority of people tend to apply powder with a brush like this that's very soft, very flimsy, and it looks great on a lot of people. But with my skin and my weird powder issues, I have to use something like this that is much more densely packed, that almost could be like a liquid foundation brush. That's how dense it is. This is the Furless CB4 brush. I love this brush for powder. Whenever you guys see me applying powder in a video, it's using this brush, especially in the last probably year or so. And the way I apply powder is just literally first kind of packing it on and pressing it into my skin. Then I'll go in and do some light blending. If you just go in straight away and blend, especially with a dense brush like this, it's just going to wipe away the foundation underneath. So make sure you're kind of packing it on first. Even if you just tap it in a couple times and then go in and pack, you don't need to be packing on like a ton of product, but I just find that that's what makes my powder and foundation look the most flawless. Another option, this one is a tiny bit more flimsy, but I don't find that it's quite as bad as something like this on my skin. This is the Morphe E1. I don't even know if they make this brush anymore, but this brush is super nice and soft, and it has the right amount of flimsiness where it's not as dense as a brush like this. But for me and what I like, 99% of the time I'll go in with this brush. But I just want to point that out, because if you have a powder that you don't like, try trying it with a firmer brush and using different techniques to apply it, because it might just be the way that you're applying it, not necessarily the product. All right, so moving on to the next one, and these are in no order, I'm just mentioning all of my favorites. This is the Maybelline Fit Me loose powder in the shade 05 Fair. So this is one of the few loose powders. I only have one other loose powder I'm going to talk about here that works for my skin. It doesn't take away the coverage underneath. This powder is one of my favorites when I had oily skin. I feel like this really locked my makeup in all day. I could use this on top of something like Laura Geller Cover Lock or the Milk Makeup Blur Liquid, which on their own for oily skin don't have the best lasting power, but if you combine it with something like this, my skin literally looked flawless all day long. That routine was actually what I did in the makeup for photography video, so I'll link that down below, but that went in depth about how I use this powder with those foundations. This is a drugstore powder. The shade is actually light enough. It's really hard to find fair powders at the drugstore. It adds a little bit of coverage, just gives you the most beautiful kind of soft focus matte finish. Think about the products that you're putting underneath your powders, because when I think about combining products, that is where I start. So if I'm going to be using something like this, which is a matte loose powder, underneath I typically would want to wear a foundation that is a little bit more dewy, so I still have a skin-like look shining through. So the only other loose powder that I love is the Cover FX Illuminating Setting Powder. This is a gorgeous powder if you like a glow. This one get if you want matte, this one get if you like glowy but you still want to set your makeup. This was one of the few with oily skin that I could have that glowy look that wouldn't break down on me throughout the day. This has such a beautiful fair pinkish tint to it, so if you have a yellow undertone, this probably isn't the powder for you, but if you have more of a neutral pink undertone and you have fair skin, this shade Light is beautiful. I've used this in so many videos. If you ever want to see any of these powders used in a video, just search the Tayla and then the name of the powder, and any video that I have using it will pop up. You need a light hand with this one. If you use a dense brush like this one with this, I like using that on this area of my face, but if I use it on my forehead, it can be a little bit too much, like too glowy almost. So I'll use a brush like this on my forehead to get a little bit more of a diffused look. This powder is one that I'll always continue to repurchase. It works great on my dry skin. It works great on my oily skin. If you like that glowy finish, if you don't get this powder. This next powder is one I would recommend if you want a very airbrushed look. This truly is a blurring kind of powder, which sounds gimmicky, but it actually works. This is the It Cosmetics Bye Bye Pores pressed powder. It says it's airbrush silk pressed powder, and it feels like friggin' silk. It feels so soft in the pan. I've hit pan on this. I haven't used this since I've had dry skin, but there's something so flattering about this powder that I do find really does smooth and almost blur out my skin. When I had oily skin, this is something that I would use on my forehead, around my pores. It truly helps. The only thing with this is that I think it might have broke me out. But that was one of the reasons that I kind of slowed down on using this. This is the only translucent powder that I have found to this day that doesn't take away the coverage underneath. So if you also have issues with that, but you don't want a powder that's going to add coverage, it's going to change the color of your foundation, then you might want to go with this powder. All right, next up, if you've seen any of my videos, you definitely would guess this powder, but this is the It Cosmetics Celebration Foundation Illumination. This is a true powder foundation. This definitely has coverage to it. I don't find it's a complete full coverage powder like they say, but you can really build this up to get great coverage on its own if you are using it as a powder foundation. I like to use it more still to this day to set my foundation. This is beautiful on dry skin. It was great on oily skin. The only thing is this doesn't last as well throughout the day as something like the Cover FX Illuminating Setting Powder. I find that it can look a little bit heavy throughout the day if you use too heavy of a hand with this. I wish they came out with more shades in this one. The shade Fair is a little bit too dark for me and it is quite yellow, but there's something so transformative about using this powder on top of a foundation. This is the powder that can save the day. If you have a foundation on that's just looking like pure shitsies, that's like patchy, too dry, just doesn't look good, this powder can totally change your face. I just used this yesterday on, you guys will see in 15 days of foundation, but there was one foundation that just looked so patchy, so dry, too matte, and I tried this on top of it yesterday, and it literally makes your skin look like a different foundation. This truly can save just about any bad foundation day, which is mostly what I reach for it now if I'm just having a foundation where I'm like, what is going on my face right now? This is a true illuminating powder, so if you don't like glowy powders, don't get this one. All right, so next up is a powder that I don't think I've heard anyone talk about online, and I actually just discovered this within the last couple months, I want to say, and I've been reaching for it a lot lately. This is the Sephora Micro Smooth powder. It has pretty light coverage. I do think this is more of like a finishing powder, but it has the most beautiful finish where it does almost smooth out and it has a satin finish. So it gives you a little bit of a glow, almost like the Laura Geller Balance and Brighten, the first one. Not as glowy as the It Cosmetics one, but it does give you more of just like a radiant kind of glow. I love how lightweight this feels on my skin. I feel like this is a totally underrated powder. This is a beautiful finishing powder. It actually reminds me a lot of the Wet n Wild Photo Focus Press Powder, which I don't love for my skin quite as much as the other products I'm talking about, but I do feel like this might be one that works for a lot of people. It's like it's almost there for me. I just don't love it as much as the Sephora one. Another powder that I also feel like is totally underrated that I haven't heard, I don't think I've ever heard anything on YouTube about this, is I should probably show you the front first, the Cargo HD Blu-ray powder. This is one of the softest matte powders. When I think of like a filter powder that gives you that smoothing kind of look, I think of this powder. I don't know what's going on with Cargo. I feel like I never hear about them anymore, but I was in Kohl's the other day and they had a lot of Cargo stuff, so I don't know. This one I think I really started picking up and using maybe a month or so before starting Accutane, so like 6 months ago now. So I don't feel like I have a good grip on how this performs on oily skin, but as my skin started getting drier, this was one of the matte powders that didn't make me look totally horrible and cakey. And I should note that on my dry skin right now, I typically only apply powders in this area. Some of these powders I can totally use on my forehead with dry skin, but I just prefer the look of having a glowier forehead, and I find that throughout the day on dry skin, my foundation doesn't break down without powder. It's actually quite magical. I'm hoping that after Accutane, my skin stays more normal dry because it really is so much easier to deal with than having oily skin. But anyways, my point being, I'm not sure how oil controlling this powder is. It works well on my dry skin. Didn't give it a full run with oily skin. A matte powder that I discovered well on Accutane that works beautifully on dry skin. I think one of you guys recommended this in the comments on a video. This is the NYX Hydra Touch Powder Foundation. Why is no one talking about this? This is in the shade Porcelain. I want to get a different shade because this shade is very yellow. But this powder, oh my god, one of the most soft pigmented powders, look at that, that really does not dry out your skin. I think the Hydra Touch description is spot on. It just kind of melts into my skin. It gives me a matte finish without looking super flat and dry. If you have dry skin but you like a matte finish and you've struggled finding powders, then try this out. I think a lot of people would love this powder. It's a great drugstore option. So next up is one that I don't like on my dry skin, but that I used to really like on my oily skin. This is the Laura Geller Double Take Baked Powder Foundation in the shade Porcelain. And I've also hit pan on this guy. This one was tricky with my oily skin because I felt like it wasn't a powder that looked phenomenal by the end of the day, but I loved it for the first probably 5 hours of wearing it. I would say this one gives you a little more coverage than the Balance and Brighten, and it has a matte finish. It did sit really beautifully on my skin for the first half of the day, and I liked the coverage that it gave me, which is why I kept reaching for this, but it is one of those that on my skin by the end of the night, it would look a little bit heavy, so just keep that in mind. It could be totally different on your skin. This is one that I would only recommend if you have normal to oily skin, but probably more on the normal side. So the last powder we're going to talk about is the Maybelline Superstay Better Skin Powder in the lightest shade 10 Porcelain. Another one of those kind of soft focus matte powders. I wouldn't say it's quite as blurring and soft looking as the Cargo Blu-ray powder, but for a drugstore option, if you want a matte powder that just sits on the skin really well, try this guy. It's a beautiful powder. I hate the packaging of this. I just feel like it's so bulky for this one little pan. It also says it has salicylic acid in it, so if you have acne-prone skin, that could help depending on how your skin reacts to salicylic acid, but just keep that in mind. This one with my dry skin looks fine on my cheek area. I haven't tried this on my forehead yet, so I can't say how it looks as like an all-over face powder on dry skin, but I did really like this powder with oily skin. I didn't find it to be the most oil controlling. I'm going to talk about one product that I think is the most oil controlling powder, but this powder, I think if you're looking for a drugstore matte powder that's not going to totally emphasize texture and everything, Better Skin is a super pretty powder. So I have 3 more products that I want to mention that are kind of like honorable mentions. They're not powders that I would use on their own at all, but I use them in different ways. So this first one is the RCMA No Color Powder. I've had so many of you guys ask me what my thoughts are on this because I never really talk about it. I actually used this for the first time when I was staying at Mallory's house, Mallory 1712, and I've always heard people raving about the RCMA No Color Powder. I just never purchased it because I was like, it's another translucent powder. I'm probably not gonna like it, but I tried it at Mallory's house, and this is when I had oily skin, and this is one of the few powders that I truly feel like was oil controlling, and I would not put this all over my face because if I did, it would do that thing where it takes away the coverage underneath. I only put this on my T-zone, and I felt like it really controlled my oil on my T-zone. If I did use this though, I would put on my liquid foundation, put a little bit of this down as like an oil controlling product, and then since it did take away a little bit of the coverage, I would then go in with like a light dusting of one of these powders over top just to add that coverage back. So if you have issues with powders like I do, just keep that in mind. But if you don't, a lot of people love this powder. I think the all over best oil controlling powder I've ever found is the Rimmel Stay Matte powder from the drugstore. That powder does amazing things for controlling oil. The only thing is Rimmel products break me out horribly. So that was one of the powders that definitely made my skin break out. I'm talking bad, deep, like cystic breakouts with that product. But once I figured out that that was really not helping my skin, I cut that out of my routine totally and stopped using it. But everyone's skin is different, so a lot of products that break me out might be totally fine on other people. So if you do have super oily skin and you want to powder this oil controlling, Rimmel Stay Matte from the drugstore, I would recommend trying. Just watch your skin to see how it reacts to it. Next 2 products are totally opposite of the RCMA. These are products that if you have dry skin or if you have oily skin but you just want a sheen to your skin. These are products that I either mix in or kind of top off my foundation with a giant fluffy brush like this one to give your skin that glow from within look. So the first one is a highlighter that I've talked about in my last Raves and Rejects video. This is the J-Cat Pearl Luminizer. Beautiful face highlight, but if you tap in a tiny bit of this and even mix it with something like another loose powder like Maybelline Fit Me, it gives you that radiant glow kind of look. Just be careful what brush you're applying this with. I would not go in with this powder alone as a face powder and something like this brush. That would be a total disaster. And I think the reason why this can work as a face powder is because of the way that it blends out. As you blend it out, it just melts into your skin and looks so beautiful. So this, not alone, mixed in. And then the XO Beauty Aurora powder, which I also mentioned in Raves and Rejects as a highlight to give you that glow from within kind of look. This can be used just really lightly, just dusted over super lightly to give you that radiant overall look. So those are just a couple products that I use to give that glow, but that aren't necessarily setting powders or powder foundations or even intended for that purpose. Whew, okay, I feel like that was a lot of info. Who's still with me right now? Comment down below. So I hope that was helpful for you guys and kind of explains why I use powder foundations and how I use different products. These are just my top powders. I reach for them over and over again. Keep in mind, like always, everyone's skin is different, so products work differently, especially face products on different people, depending on your skin type, your texture, what you're dealing with as far as your skin concerns. Products are going to work totally different, and I am living proof of that now. A lot of products that used to work with me with oily skin just look terrible on my skin now, and vice versa. So just keep that in mind when you're taking recommendations from anyone on the interweb. I'm just here to share what works for me, and hopefully it can also work for you. If you did enjoy this video and found it helpful, don't forget to give it a thumbs up. I really appreciate it, and it helps me out. I tried filming swatches of these powders, and you really couldn't see anything, so That's why there aren't swatches in this video. Leave every powder link down below in the description box and the makeup on the rest of my face. But just to quickly go over that, for bronzer, I used the Kevyn Aucoin Celestial Bronzing Veil. I used it more as a contour today. Just used the lightest shade here. This is one of my favorite products. Blush, I used Ciate Summer Love, also one of my favorite blushes ever. Highlight, I used the new Anastasia Amrezy highlight. And I just used a little bit of it, but you can make this friggin' blinding. For lips, I used the NARS lip pigment in the shade Don't Stop. Super bright red. I really liked the formula of this and how it didn't feel too drying, but I really don't like the applicator. It's like a super stiff applicator. But then on top of it, I put a little bit of the Ultra Glossy Lip by ColourPop in the shade Netta. You guys will see me raving in one of the days of 15 Days of Foundation about this when I first tried it, but I've used it about, I want to say 3 times since that video that you guys will be seeing, and I am so in love with this. This is the Milani Most Loved Mattes palette. This is their new eyeshadow palette, and I also have this one, Bold Obsessions, which is their other one that has just some shimmer shades in there. Holy shitsies, you guys. These are one of the best drugstore releases of all time. I'm so impressed by these. It's all of my eyeshadows on my eyes right now, and my lashes are Pure Cosmetics Diva lashes. So again, this is the last Foundation Friday before the series starts, so the next Foundation Friday will be after 15 Days of Foundation. So I love you guys. Thanks for watching. See you on Monday. Bye.